During this first preparatory committee for the 11th NPT review conference, the IPB has already organized 2 meetings on the subjects of the nuclear weapon-free Europe and on the role of nuclear weapons in a shifting geopolitical landscape. Today, we would like to address a topic of great importance for the future of disarmament on the use of the ongoing and rapid technological developments that are enabling new forms of computerized warfare, including the use of drones, the use of artificial intelligence, and the militarization of space. This is a new arms race that is undergoing alarming developments, and it calls for reflection on the use of these new technologies in a military context. It's necessary to identify the role of technology and artificial intelligence in order to adapt international laws and to relaunch disarmament by including these new fields. What measures need to be taken to prevent these worrying developments? To answer this question, we have invited 2 leading experts on these issues to help us in our reflection, and I would like to thank them in advance for their contributions. The 2 guests, the 2 panelists, our 2 speakers are Michael Klare, professor and researcher from the United States, and Jürgen Altmann, is a physicist and peace researcher from Germany. We will begin with Michael Klare. Michael Klare is Five College Professor Emeritus of Peace and World Security Studies, and is the director of the Five College Program in Peace and World Security Studies. He holds a BA and MA from Columbia University and a PhD from the Graduate School of the Onion Institute. He has written widely on US military policy, international peace and security affairs, the global arms trade and global resource politics. Michael Klare serves on the board of the Arms Control Association and advises other organizations in this field. Michael Klare, you heard my introduction. You have now the floor.
Thank you very much. First, can you hear me okay? Good, okay. So I'm pleased to be able to join you in this very, very important conversation. This topic can only become more important in the future. So I think it's wonderful that you're having this discussion today. I'm sure we'll be having more like them in the future. So I was asked in particular to discuss the relationship or the connection between developments in technology on one hand, specifically developments in artificial intelligence and autonomy on one hand, and the risk of nuclear escalation on the other. So I want to look at the connection, but we have to remember that there's a lot of developments at each side of that we could spend all day talking about. That is to say, there are a lot of developments in technology that would require considerable amount of time to discuss. I'm just going to mention, we're talking about the use of artificial intelligence by the military for a wide variety of activities, from logistics to surveillance to reconnaissance, and also for combat purposes. Artificial intelligence is being combined with another emerging technology, robotics and autonomy, to produce weaponized drones for air battle, for sea battle, and ground battle, so-called autonomous weapon systems, or some call them lethal autonomous weapon systems. These could be ground weapons, air weapons, or sea weapons, also sometimes called unmanned weapons by the military, unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs, unmanned ground vehicles, UGVs, unmanned surface vessels, USVs, and unmanned undersea vessels, or submarines, drone submarines, UUVs. So there is a lot of development in this area, and this has raised concern in the international community because of the risks that these devices, these lethal autonomous weapons, will infringe on international humanitarian law by their inability to conform with requirements of international law requiring combatants to distinguish between enemy soldiers and civilians on the battlefield. And for this reason, there are efforts underway in Geneva under the auspices of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons to ban such devices, also called killer robots, altogether. But I just want to mention that I will be speaking on other developments that bear more closely on nuclear weapons. And obviously in the area of nuclear weapons, there's a lot that could be said because we've seen the use of nuclear threats by Russia in the war in Ukraine, raising the prospect of growing prospect of nuclear weapons use, and increasing tensions over Taiwan, which could spark a war between US and China, and the use of nuclear weapons. So there's a lot of concern about nuclear weapons as well. But I want to talk about the relationship, the connection between these two sets of developments. And my belief is that the weaponization of artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies is increasing the risk of nuclear escalation. This is especially true, I believe, because we are in an environment in which the doctrine of great power competition, as the US military calls it, is shaping the global military environment. In the past, the focus, until recently, the focus of US military planning has been counterterrorism, the global war on terror. And yes, drones were used in that conflict to hunt down and track and kill suspected militants. So this technology has already been used in war. More recently in Ukraine, a regional conflict, drones have been used for surveillance and also for attack purposes with deadly consequences. But these uses of these technologies do not bear directly on nuclear weapons. It is the commitment by the US and the other major powers to preparation for all-out war, high-end war, they call it, or high-intensity conflict between the major powers that we see this danger arising. Because in this new environment, there is a premium placed on the utilization of these new technologies for every aspect of war. And these will, I believe, will increase the risk of nuclear conflict. Now, why is this so? This is so because the relationship between emerging technologies and nuclear weapons is being affected by two aspects of the technology revolution. The first is the potential for the use of these weapons for an enhanced first strike nuclear capability. I'm not accusing any government of seeking such a capability, but the technologies are being developed in a way that would facilitate a future nuclear first strike, in particular by creating the capacity to deploy swarms, dozens, hundreds of drone aircraft equipped with highly advanced, highly sophisticated sensor devices that can track in real time mobile missile systems, such as including mobile ICBMs, which both China and Russia rely on for their second strike capability. At present, those missiles, when they're moving around, are relatively safe from a first strike. But when you deploy hundreds, swarms of AI-empowered drones that could track them and attack them, the inviolability, the invulnerability of mobile missiles begins to disappear. The same thing is happening in the ocean. The US is developing underwater drones, UUVs, in swarms that could potentially track Russian and Chinese nuclear-carrying submarines. They are most invulnerable second strike retaliatory capability. So merely by developing and deploying these technologies, even if there's not an intent to conduct a first strike, is making nuclear stability more precarious, because China and Russia, and if those countries develop similar capabilities, the United States will have to be more anxious about a possible first strike by the enemy, put their own nuclear weapons on higher alert, and be more inclined perhaps to use them in the event of a crisis. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is increased information overload in battle, resulting in increased reliance on what I call robot generals, or automated command decision-making systems. In the kind of warfare expected in a great power conflict in the future, where you're going to have thousands and thousands of UAVs and UGVs engaged in high-intensity conflicts simultaneously, the information overload on human commanders is going to be increased exponentially to the point where it'll be very difficult to make decisions. So more and more, the militaries of the major powers are developing automated command and control decision-making systems powered by artificial intelligence to determine what's happening on the battlefield, and to issue instructions to the shooters, aircraft, ships, artillery, to attack enemy positions, and to do this at machine speed, faster than humans can comprehend. And this raises enormous concerns. We know that artificial intelligence is capable of errors and mistakes and hallucinations, as they're called. We know they can be hacked. We also have to worry about the training data fed to these systems. Are they going to be fed? What kind of war scenarios will they be fed? We have to worry about a bias in favor of escalation, because these will all be military people feeding them information. Will they feed them examples of de-escalation in conflict? It's hard to know. I suspect the bias will be the other way. So we have to worry that these automated command and control decision-making systems, like the US GADC2, Joint All-Domain Command and Control System, will take over the job of fighting war from humans and make the decision when to use nuclear weapons. That is the greatest danger we face today from the use of artificial intelligence. Now, finally, there are some who say that artificial intelligence can be used to reduce the risk of escalation by providing decision makers with more refined information about the battlefield. But I believe, on the basis of what I've just said, that the risk is greater in the other direction, that the utilization of these devices in swarms and the automation of command and control and decision-making by artificial intelligence will diminish human control over the decision to use nuclear weapons and increase the risk of nuclear escalation in a crisis. So I'll stop there. I hope that's useful. I'm now going to post a source where you could go for more information on all this, a primer I've written on artificial intelligence and nuclear escalation risks that anyone could see, and I welcome your questions.
Okay, thank you very much for your statement, Michael. We have a lot of information, a lot of worrying information, I must say. It has been recorded for I say that for the people here in the room, and you can find it again. And also for more information, the indication of Michael. And perhaps you have now question. We will make the questions for Michael before we hear the next speaker, because Michael cannot wait more than 1 hour. And I give the floor to the people in the room. If you have question, yes.
Hello, my name is Graham. I am a youth activist with the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation. We hear a lot of talk with AI-specific systems regarding the idea of keeping a human in the loop at all times, that if we just provide these systems with human oversight, they will be fine. I wonder, based off of your research, what your kind of take is on that. Is that an acceptable solution in these scenarios? What is kind of your take on that specific approach to kind of managing these systems?
So I hear this all the time from the U.S. Department of Defense and the U.S. Department of State. They say humans will remain in the loop at all times. But from my understanding, humans will have very little role in this process. With the JADC2, the Joint All-Domain Command and Control System, all of the intelligence processing will be done by machines, and the machines will then use that information to develop packages of strike options, attack this tank formation, attack that radar station, whatever they are, and give the commander in the field like 30 seconds to decide yes or no. I don't consider that a human in the loop. But under those kind of pressures of warfare, where you have to make a decision very rapidly, I don't see how this kind of decision assistance, computer-assisted decision-making, as it's called, can be considered preserving human control. I think it will diminish human control to the point of zero.
Thank you for your answer.
Other question? Yes.
Yes. Hello, my name is Sanya Rajpal. I'm here from the UK representing SGI. I wanted to ask a little bit more about the training data that you mentioned, and the point that because it's being framed by people who are within the field, there is going to be a bias towards escalation. I wonder what can be done to I mean, the reality is that this is in the process of happening. So what can be done to improve the quality of data, to reduce that bias towards escalation? Is it about adding more sociological data? Is it about adding kind of when has there been points of de-escalation? What has caused that? Or what is that wider breadth of data that could possibly help to shift this bias?
Well, now that's a very good question. And to be honest with you, I haven't given it enough thought. I'm trying to discover, the first task is to discover where this is being done. And a big problem is for researchers is that a lot of it is being done not by the Department of Defense in the United States and in other countries, but by private companies that do not provide information about what they're doing. So there's a lot of secrecy involved in all of this. And it's unclear what private contractors are providing, doing the training of the algorithms, and where they're located and who is doing the training. So I think the answer to your question is for researchers like myself and anybody else to do more investigation on how the process is taking place and where and by whom. Well, one of the companies we know involved is Palantir, a company that has ties, I believe, to the CIA in the past. It's associated with Peter Thiel, who's a close pal of Donald Trump and could well be a cabinet member in a new Trump administration. But all their work is secret. So good question, requires investigation.
And is it okay if I ask a follow-up? Yeah, thank
Please.
you. And you kind of alluded to it, that a lot of these conversations are being had predominantly in the world of defense and some private sector in the context of defense. Do you find that if you look at the very other end, extreme end of technology companies and big tech, etc., is there an awareness in the world of tech that is doing a lot of the foundational development of the infrastructure around AI, that what could be the possible outcome of the use of the technology they're developing? Is that
repeat that? What could be the
do the people who are in deep tech or more on the complete technical side of this spectrum,
yes,
you find there to be an engagement or awareness of these developers of what their technology can be used for? Or is these conversations happening pretty much on the defense side of the spectrum, and the people who are creating it don't necessarily aren't engaging with this conversation?
That's a very good question. And the answer is that the people in the tech field are very much engaged in this conversation. There's an organization called the Future of Life Institute, which you could all look up, which is composed of people from Silicon Valley who have become frightened, alarmed by the dangers implicit in using these technologies and are trying to campaign against their abuse. So there are people within the industry who are speaking out against the dangers. There was a revolt in 2018 at Google by employees who didn't want to work on Project Maven, which was an early use of artificial intelligence for targeting of militants by drone aircraft. And for a while, Google pulled out of the military business, but I think they've now rejoined, they've been sucked back into military work. But yes, there is an appreciation among tech workers, tech executives of the dangers.
Is there another question in the room? Yes, please.
Regina Hagen from Germany. I wonder, is there, I don't know whether you can see me anyway. I wonder, is there any attempts by governments, by any states, to work on this issue and to try to get a hold on it. I think it was the Future of Life Institute, I'm not sure, who asked for at least 6 months of moratorium in artificial intelligence development. Is there any support from governments, or is this something that is critically discussed in our circles, but not on the state level?
So very good question. The people who are calling for a freeze on development of advanced algorithms are mainly in the public sector, and they're not necessarily talking about the military use, but yes, the Future of Life people are involved in that. On the governmental level, there has been a proposal by the United States to conduct what are called strategic stability talks with Russia and China to address these issues. These talks began with Russia before the war in Ukraine, and there was an agreement to have technical talks on this problem, and they have since been suspended since the war in Ukraine began, and it's unclear when or if they will ever be resumed. So this is one of yet another tragedy of the Ukraine war. The US has proposed conducting these kind of talks with China, and reportedly the Chinese have rebuffed these proposals, saying that the United States has to alter the entire thrust of its policy towards China, which they view as extremely hostile. And they're not willing to discuss this outside of a larger discussion of US-China relations. So at the level of the major military powers, no discussion right now. This is something that activists should be calling for. Other governments, the Austrian government in particular, you're in Vienna, has conducted some meetings on the impact of emerging technologies on nuclear escalation. And you can search for those discussions. They've been supported by Germany, France, and other countries in Europe, but that's just been conversations, not actual negotiations. So the answer is there are no negotiations in this at the strategic nuclear dimension. There are negotiations in Geneva about the use of autonomous weapons in combat, but that's a separate issue.
Yes, you already answered the question in the chat about perspectives for an agreement between nuclear powers towards mitigating the risks that artificial intelligence pose. Yes.
Yes, but as I indicated, no such talks are underway, and at this point, there's no prospect for such talks to take place.
And what have we to do as peace activists? What do you say?
Well, there's a lot that we could do. First of all, there needs to be greater awareness of what I've been talking about, which is the relationship between artificial intelligence and nuclear escalation. Those connections are not well understood. There's been much more work done by NGOs about the risks to international humanitarian law. So the campaign to stop killer robots in Geneva has done an excellent job of raising awareness about that aspect of the problem, but not about the issues of nuclear risk. So we need a lot more education around that. And then I think in the United States, where I'm active, we have to work with Congress to impose greater controls and mechanisms to slow down this process. So the emphasis has to be on slowing things down. But right now, you have an arms race environment about AI in Washington, and I'm sure in China and Russia and so on. So we have to work with parliaments to put pressure on governments to slow this process down.
We have another question. Yes, please.
Hi, yes, not a question, just a comment. Hello, Michael, thank you for your remarks. My name is Savannah Blaylock. I'm from the US delegation. So I just wanted to comment that I would be careful about making the assumption that the US government is not concerned or talking about this issue. Just because strategic stability talks are no longer viable because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine does not mean that we are not still concerned about this issue. And in fact, the White House and Department of State have recently put out their own statements on AI and its use specifically with nuclear weapons as well. So this is something we're very concerned about. We've also stated here and in many other places that we're open to dialogue with both China and Russia with no preconditions. So I think that there is a willingness on our part to have those discussions should they be willing to come to the table. So just wanted to comment on that we really are thinking about this, and I don't work for the Department of Defense, so I won't speak for them on the comments you made about that, but we do very strongly state that we will keep a human in the loop, and we do not plan on any sort of taking that statement back at all. So just wanted to confirm that is our policy, and we are open to dialogue and conducting that within the United States government right now.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I'm sorry, could you repeat your name for me? It went by too fast.
Sure, yeah, my name is Savannah.
Thank you. So I did state very clearly that the US government has attempted to conduct strategic stability talks with Russia and China, and I support the administration's efforts to make that happen. And I indicated what the obstacles to that were. So yes, I acknowledge the administration's efforts in that area. As I say, my worry is that the developments of this technology is being rushed because of a kind of an arms race environment faster than those of us, including in government, who wish to ensure that humans retain control at every stage of the game. So that's my worry, that the speed of militarization or weaponization is happening faster than the speed or than the progress in adopting controls and regulations. But I acknowledge that the Biden administration is committed to progress in talks.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. I just wanted to clarify that despite whatever is happening on the global stage, we are still concerned about this in the US government, because I heard some conversation that there's nothing really going on, and we are definitely thinking about this issue internally as well. So thank you, appreciate it.
Can I?
And your neighbor wants to add something?
Sorry.
Yes, thank you. I'm Deborah Fisher from the U.S. Department of State. We are actually working to try to build an international consensus around the norms of responsible behavior. When it comes to military use of AI, in February, we launched the Political Declaration of Responsible Military Use of AI and Autonomy. The declaration declares a set of principles that we seek to establish an international framework of responsibility in this area. And we've reached out to many countries also in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America, because we believe all of these states have equities in this, regardless of whether they intend to use AI in their militaries or not. And we certainly can discuss this more. I'd like to invite everybody to our side event tomorrow at 1:15 to 2:30. It will also be streamed live. And it will be here in the Vienna International Center, M2, and I'm also happy to provide the link. But we are doing a lot of work in this area.
If I may respond, thank you. I'm aware of all of these developments. It should be made clear to participants in this panel that there are two approaches being advanced in addressing the question or the problem, the challenge of deploying autonomous weapons system. One approach is that favored by the US government and others to develop voluntary rules of conduct and ethical principles as has been done by the US Department of Defense. But these are voluntary and there's no compliance mechanism for them. And there really is no framework, is the word you used, no international framework to appraise whether these principles are being followed. That's one approach, and it has its merits. Another approach is being advanced by many countries, including Austria, where you're now sitting, calling for an binding international treaty under the auspices of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, the CCW, which would outlaw the deployment of autonomous weapons that have a risk of being losing their human control. And many other governments around the world, dozens of them, including most in Latin America, have agreed in calling for a binding treaty on this in this area, rather than relying solely on voluntary statements of principle. Now, both of these measures have their merits and their problems with them. So I hope that I think people should attend the U.S. side event to hear the U.S. Approach, because it does have its merits. But I hope you'll also hear from the Austrian government and others that favor a binding measure. So there is a debate, and I do recognize the U.S. has put forward this approach, and it does have its merits.
Yes, thank you, Michael. Do you want another question, or have you a comment, Mrs.?
I just wanted to invite the Austrian government and all the governments and all participants to come to the side event tomorrow. These are they're trying to build responsible behavior, and certainly doesn't rule out anything in the future, but it's something to build upon. Thank you.
Is there another question in the room? Yes, you can.
Hello, it's me again. I have a question around, so one is, where do you think are the biggest misunderstandings when it comes to the potential impact of AI within the military complex? So be that from decision makers and lawmakers, but also even in civil society. What do you think are the key misunderstandings that are limiting the debate at the moment?
The key misunderstandings in this area?
Of decision makers and even in civil society, which are limiting the ability to be able to manage this threat that's upcoming.
Well, I think our friends from the U.S. State Department have put their finger on it, which is the term humans in the loop, that will humans always be in the loop in decisions about the use of weapons, especially nuclear weapons, and how do you ensure that? And to what degree is artificial intelligence undermining that essential requirement that we have, that humans always have the last word, the final word in the use of nuclear weapons and escalation of conflict as well. And there's a lot of lack of knowledge about what role artificial intelligence will play in the command and control decision-making process in future wars, which will be far more intense and occur much more rapidly than we're seeing, for example, in Ukraine. So this is the area of greatest uncertainty to me. And what kind of flaws does artificial intelligence have that could endanger this process of decision-making? And how do we ensure that humans remain in the loop under these circumstances? I don't question the sincerity of U.S. officials who have spoken to keep humans in the loop in decision-making, but the technologies are developing faster than perhaps we're capable of ensuring that. So that's what has to be explored.
Yes, another comment or question?
Yes, sorry to come back to the discussion we had before. My name is Leo Obama. I'm a representative of the Austrian delegation at the NPT. And as you said correctly, Austria within the CCW in the GGE laws is trying to see whether we can establish some sort of legally binding instrument to prohibit some autonomous weapon systems and regulate others. And we are very concerned about the developments in this area and try to push for international discussions with all stakeholders. And also, just in case some are interested, we commissioned a brochure compiled by the University of York. And one chapter in this brochure is on the nexus on AI and its impact on nuclear weapons. So if anybody's interested, we also have some copies. And also thank you for the invitation to your side event. We are very interested and would like to participate tomorrow. Yes, we commissioned a brochure. We had a side event yesterday. It's on new findings on the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons. And it has a variety of chapters. We also put some upstairs, and it's also online on our website. And one chapter is specifically on AI and what impact it might have on the nuclear weapons field.
Have you a comment, okay, Michael?
No, that doesn't require a comment. I'd only ask, perhaps you could put in the chat a link to the report.
Yes, we will see the technical side. Yes. We'll do it. Okay. Is there any question for Michael? Klare?
Yes, I don't want to rob Jürgen of an opportunity to speak, so maybe it's a time for him to intervene.
Yes, that's what I wanted to say now. We can now hear perhaps our second speaker, Jürgen. Are you online? Yes.
Yes, I am. I hope you can hear me.
Also Jürgen Altmann is a physicist and Physiker and peace researcher at Technische Universität Dortmund in Germany. He is a co-founder and the chair of the German Research Association for Science, Disarmament and International Security, FONAS. He teaches about the relationship of natural science, armament and disarmament, and has authored chapters in corresponding textbooks. He is vice chair of the International Committee for Robot Arms Control, ICRAC, a not-for-profit association committed to the peaceful use of robotics in the service of humanity. That's it. Perhaps you want to add something, Jürgen, and you have now the floor.
Okay, yes. Hello, everybody. Thank you for the invitation. I want to share a few view graphs, and now I need to try to do that. Let's see. I would say this one here. Is this being seen? The view graph? Is it okay? Do you see me?
It's okay for us.
Okay, very good. So the title of this meeting is Technology, Artificial Intelligence and Nuclear Weapons. And I want to point out some dangers that are connected to these developments. Some of them have already been mentioned by Michael, and some very short ideas how these dangers could be contained. I have done research on uninhabited armed systems since quite a few years. In fact, my first connection with that started in the year 2000 or so, when I did a first study on potential military uses of microsystems technologies. So this is what I'll be talking about. A short remark on military research and development at large and accompanying revolutions. Then a look at artificial intelligence and its potential military applications. Mentioning the dangers of, in particular, autonomous weapon systems. Some of them have already been mentioned, and other military uses of artificial intelligence. And then I will emphasize that a return to arms control, and in particular, going to preventive arms control, is needed. So first, let us have a look at the history of the military technology. In very rough strokes, it started, if you wish, or it went over fire weapons, then came nuclear weapons. The next wave 20 years or so ago was net-centric warfare, and now we are on the threshold of autonomous weapon systems. We already have military units that prepare cyber warfare, and there's talk about intelligentized warfare. Let us have a short look at weapon systems and their times that they need to arrive on target, or that the effect needs to be effective. So subsonic nuclear bomber flying over 5,000 kilometers needs about 6 hours. An intercontinental ballistic missile over double the distance, as for instance from the US to Russia, needs about 30 minutes. There's much talk at the moment about hypersonic glide vehicles, that they may be faster, but in fact they are a bit slower. So there's some misconception about the speed of hypersonic missiles. Nevertheless, it's tens of minutes. If there is a sea-launched ballistic missile launched from submarines at somewhat forward positions, that's not 10,000 kilometers, that may be 2,000 or so. So it's 10 minutes to arrive. And if one thinks of a hypersonic cruise missile, not the glide vehicle through space, but hypersonic cruise missile through the atmosphere, going for 1,500 kilometers could be a typical distance. This takes 15 minutes. A supersonic missile that is shot about over 5 kilometers needs just 7 seconds to attack. And a cyber attack, if it has been prepared by working oneself into the computer systems of an opponent, of an enemy, could be launched within seconds. So all these times for travel or for propagation are the upper bound for the time needed or that you have if you are under attack to react, to either use the systems or maybe lose your systems. So these times are shorter than the physical transport times that I just mentioned. Let us look at the scale of military research and development. It has become real big after 1945, mainly in the Cold War, but hasn't really lost speed. If one looks at the funding for military research and development, it's the US that spends about 2/3 of the world funding for military research and development. That's at present about $70 billion per year. The next in the rank countries, including Russia, China, UK, France, etc., spend less than $5 billion per year on research and development, somehow proportional to the respective total defense outlays that these countries have. So with this much about money spent on new technologies, generally the US is the forerunner. So if one wants to look what the trends in military technology are coming and could arrive in 5 or 10 or 15 years, it's quite, on the one hand, easy to look into the US and then extrapolate what other countries might have in the same time frame, or maybe 5 years after the US. And the US is relatively transparent about its military research. So it's for a researcher like me who does military technology assessment and thinks about preventive limitations, it is relatively easy. It's much more difficult in France and even, of course, much more in China and Russia. A short look at fields that are being worked on in present military research and development on the general areas. There is the fields of nanotechnology, biotechnology, information technology, and cognitive science have become fashionable after 2000 or 2001. There's an interesting quote here from the National Security Goals for Nanotechnology, Biotechnology, Information Technology, and Cognitive Science, NBIC. The net result of accomplishing the stated goals would reduce the likelihood of war by providing an overwhelming US technological advantage, would significantly reduce the cost of training military manpower, and would significantly reduce the number of lives lost during conflict. So this idea of overwhelming US technological advantage is a trope that you find since decades in the US. That's the general goal of US military research and development. So looking at another general field that is one of our main topics, that's artificial intelligence. It is being used for big data analysis. It's being used in logistics, in autonomous weapon systems, in battle management, in cyber war, and nuclear weapons. I'll go into each of these subfields on the next view graph. In general, one finds quotes such as this one: future progress in AI has the potential to be a transformative national security technology on a par with nuclear weapons, aircraft, computers, and biotech. So going through a few of these more special fields, synthetic biology could lead to new biochemical agents and gene drives. Additive manufacturing, also called 3D printing, could and has already been demonstrated, demonstrated to be able to produce fire weapons, small ones. Aircraft and missile components have already been produced by additive manufacturing, and there's work on biological cells, etc. A relatively new field in physics is quantum computing, which could lead to breaking of codes if traditional methods of encryption are still being used. And there is the outlook for extremely sensitive sensing, so that some colleagues in physics start to think about possibilities to find submarine ballistic missile carrier submarines in the ocean to be able to destroy them in a first strike, as had been mentioned by Michael a couple of minutes ago. Then a quite different field, enhanced soldiers and body manipulation, still quite far off, tried only on real patients with Parkinson's disease or whatever. But there is the general concept of providing future soldiers, maybe in 30 years, with brain interfaces or manipulate their body biochemistry. Let's look at some of the specific areas. I have already mentioned hypersonic glide missiles that partly go to space and are not much faster. They are, in fact, a little slower than ballistic missiles and hypersonic cruise missiles. Autonomous weapon systems and swarms of these have been mentioned by Michael already. Cyber offense is already, if you wish, normal business for some military units worldwide. The space weapons is also a topic of 40 or so years ago, but nevertheless, there are at least research and some testing is going on until the present time. And one has to note that all these specific fields do provide some synergies. So for instance, nanoelectronics with sensors and AI together can provide many more capabilities than the subfields as such alone. A remark to do with my professional work, so to speak, one needs military technology assessment in all such areas. One needs systematic science and technology-based peace research to then be able to, on the one hand, judge on potential dangers for international security and peace on the one hand, and develop concepts for preventive limitations on the other. Now, let's get to artificial intelligence proper. There is much hype about this. Several people ask, what exactly is artificial intelligence? One possible definition is these are artificial systems that fulfill tasks that used to require intelligent behavior of humans. And now what is human or natural intelligence? Well, there are several capabilities that we have, such as speaking, understanding, learning, arguing, self-awareness, and creativity. What of this could artificial intelligence provide? Well, it has already been demonstrated with some impressive successes, among others, knowledge, arguing, planning, understanding, and processing language, image recognition, and robotics. So lawnmowers are fairly well known by now, robotic ones, and famous was the victory over the world champion in Go. And fields that are very important at present are machine learning or deep learning on the one hand and big data analysis on the other. And there are big government support programs in order to provide the future competitiveness of the respective national industry and economy. So a short look at machine learning or deep learning. One has a computer program with big memory, and one trains these systems, these algorithms with many examples. One inputs data and then often specifies what these data mean. This could be an image, for instance. We'll see a few of those. In some cases, there is some pre-processing, such as in this case, to just measure the relative distances between several properties of a face. And different types of learning algorithms are being used, for instance, such as so-called deep neural networks. I can respond to questions if you want me to do so. But there are also quite a few errors that these learning methods show. So for instance, this left picture has been recognized by one such algorithm with 58% confidence. One has added some digital noise to the image to an extent that one doesn't really notice it as a human in the right picture. But this has been recognized with the same algorithm with 99% confidence, even as a gibbon, that is sort of monkey. Similarly, we have no difficulties understanding the sense of this stop sign, whereas an algorithm has seen it as a quite different sign in tests at some US university. Here are a few more examples of wrong classifications of certain images. So take the upper center, and a dog, obviously a dog has been recognized as an Indian elephant, and quite a few others. So this is really a science of itself within the AI image recognition area of how could you fake an image that a human has no difficulties in recognizing and classifying, so that an AI algorithm does a mistake. Concerning potential misuses of AI, there is quite an amount of ethical discussion underway worldwide at the moment, and since maybe 5 or 10 years, several high-level declarations about the ethics have been published, for instance, in 2019 by the OECD. So there's a call for a robust, secure, and safe way of functioning. The European Commission just 2 years ago has published a draft, which just the Parliament in 6 weeks ago has agreed to in a sense, but has provided several amendments. So many of these ethical declarations about what should be society be doing with AI mention challenges and risks for jobs, risk for privacy, risk for safety. They mention ethical issues, biases, they mention digital divide, etc. However, military uses of AI are either not mentioned at all in these studies, or they are explicitly excluded, as is the case with the draft European AI law. Some studies mention some small applications of AI. So, for instance, the European Group on Ethics has a remark on autonomous systems. A French study, then tasked by the Prime Minister, mentions the problem of autonomous weapon systems, but usually other military AI uses, such as in military decision-making in general, or in nuclear weapons decision-making in particular, are usually not considered. On the whole, and this echoes something that Michael said earlier, there's little systematic treatment of the consequences for international security of AI uses in armed forces. However, if one looks at the military literature, many such articles emphasize the military strength and that AI would provide, and in particular also technological and then military superiority over potential enemies. So what could be these potential military uses? Some of them in general terms also already mentioned. In logistics, in training and simulation, in autonomous weapon systems, in battle management, in cyber war, and in nuclear weapons. I'll go through these in a minute. I have already cited this quote that this AI has the potential to be a transformative national security technology on a par with nuclear weapons, aircraft, computers, and biotech. So in logistics, this would be used for acquisition of systems, of weapons, of equipment, for better supply and maintenance. In training, AI could be used in real training, but also in combat simulation, where computers, so to speak, combat against each other, and AI could learn from the respective variations in strategy and tactics and which one would be more effective in combat. It could be the analysis of actions and statements of potential enemies to find indications of a preparation for an attack that would maybe remain under the radar of normal intelligence agencies. In strategy and battle management, AI could help analyze the strategic situation and the tactical situation. And for decision support, it could propose decisions. It could coordinate certain missions or actions, but possibly, as already mentioned, under severe time pressure, even make decisions if released for that type of acting. In cyber war, threat analysis and early warning, could profit from AI, detecting and analyzing attacks. How big is the scope of it? Who might be the originator? Again, prepare or propose attack decisions and possibly make decisions in reaction to a cyber attack. It might be very relevant whether you act within 1 millisecond or just 100 milliseconds. And now coming to the main topic of the title today, nuclear weapons. AI could be used for early warning to detect a nuclear attack is underway or detect indications of its being prepared. The attack could be characterized and the counterattack could be prepared, or maybe even launch the counterattack on itself without human involvement. I note that there is an initiative in the US Congress to decide on a law that would prohibit autonomous launches of nuclear weapons, but it's still in some committees there. In general, AI in nuclear decision-making could support humans for a more rational decision, or it could reduce the space for human checking. And as Michael just said, there's much need, a high need for research on how the one thing could be done and the other thing could be reduced or at least contained. I had already mentioned the possibilities of principal possibilities of locating nuclear submarines and land mobile missiles, or again mentioned by Michael already, rendering them vulnerable, which could endanger the second strike capability of a nuclear power and would lead to a high nervousness in a crisis. And there's a general problem of the entanglement of conventional and nuclear weapons. Again, I'm ready to respond to questions in this area. There are big problems with artificial intelligence introduced into military battle management, decision-making, etc. So from where would one take the data for training of the learning algorithms? There will not be so many, if one does a board game such as Go or chess or what have you, it's fairly easy on fast computers to do hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of cycles and try out all kinds of tactics and strategies. But there will be only very few real armed conflicts to provide training data for potential future battle management algorithms. So one will necessarily have to rely on simulations. And however, the enemy could behave very differently from what has gone as assumptions into these simulations. And the same holds for the enemy control programs. So it's a very problematic issue. So finally, coming to the dangers connected with AI uses and in particular autonomous weapon systems. That's an area I have really done my own research. So on the political level, one can constitute that or can state that the threshold for using force in other countries, violent force, decreases if there are no own soldiers to be sent in physical persons there. But this holds already with the remotely controlled drones and other uninhabited weapon systems. It is important to not just focus on asymmetric scenarios as we have with US and British drones in the Middle East or in some countries of Africa. It is obvious that many countries can or will acquire autonomous weapon systems if there is a big rush towards them. Autonomous weapons systems and AI for war are not really needed militarily for asymmetric scenarios. No, they are rather prepared for war against an about equally capable enemy. And this was what Michael mentioned with great power war, for which they are being prepared. It's obvious we already see an arms race and proliferation with armed, remotely controlled drones. But this will also happen then with autonomous weapon systems and maybe other military AI systems. Small autonomous weapon systems could also proliferate to terrorists and criminals. And if states had developed them, they would be much more sophisticated than if the terrorists would have to build them on their own covertly as a small group. In international humanitarian law, one has two main tasks or obligations as a military decision maker. One has to discriminate between combatants and non-combatants. And there is a proportionality rule. If an attack on a legitimate military target will also hit civilians or civilian objects, this collateral damage must not be excessive compared with the expected military advantage. And then now the question is, and there are very few robotics colleagues who say that in the future algorithms will be better than humans in compliance with such rules, but one can have severe doubts, at least for the midterm future. Will the envisioned AI be able to judge a situation or a military potential action on the level of human abilities? In simple situations on the high seas, no other people around, no other vehicles around, maybe. However, in complex situations, this will not be possible for several decades. How about the question of stability? In general, a military situation between potential enemies is stable when no side would benefit from an attack. And there is a special aspect of stability or instability in a hard crisis. If one side would suffer from strong losses, if the adversary would strike first, this produces motives to strike preemptively first, to be the first who shoots things before they are being shot at by the opponent, the enemy. So this is famous crisis instability, long discussed with nuclear weapons, but applies also to non-nuclear weapons, in particular if they are deployed at short mutual distances. So in such a situation, when there is the question of use or lose, erroneous indications of attack could lead into war. We had several scenarios of such war by mistake that was feared with nuclear weapons, and there were several instances in and after the Cold War when early warning signals in Russia or in the US signaled we are being attacked with nuclear weapons. The most famous case is the one of then Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov in October 1983, where the new early warning system, Soviet early warning system, signaled 5 missiles launched against us, and he understood or felt intuitively correctly that this was a false alarm, and a so-called second strike, which would in fact have been the first one, wasn't launched. We may have similar situations with military systems, either consisting of autonomous weapon systems or are more generally controlled by AI, two separate systems of automated action and reaction that would interact with each other. However, they could never be tested together, and the result of such mutual interaction is unpredictable. Escalation into war is probable, in particular if, because of the use or lose dilemma, they are being programmed in such a way that if they sense that they are being shot at, they need to shoot back very fast before they are being hit and destroyed. So let's look at the end at some general characteristics of the coming new technologies. We do see increasing dual use. Many systems or technologies are being developed also in a civilian industry context. For several systems, the production technologies become more generally available, potentially controlled by software. Think of 3D printing. So they could be produced in military systems, could be produced in small, inconspicuous facilities even also by non-state actors. Weapons and battle management, increasingly controlled by AI, provide more possibilities for surprise attack, including non-nuclear attacks against strategic targets, including nuclear strategic targets. And as I said, there is this entanglement convention in nuclear warfare. We will have reduced warning and reaction times, and we will have to face destabilization on many levels, markedly increased threats and fears, markedly higher motives to act fast, and strong motives for pre-programmed actions that may not be fit to the actual situation due to unforeseen circumstances or unforeseen actions by the enemy. So what I think is needed is a return to arms control and a new attempt at preventive arms control. So in just 5 sentences, it is needed to continue or reinvigorate nuclear arms control. One needs a new start, a follow-on to the New START treaty, which will expire 3 years from now if nothing happens. This new nuclear arms control should optimally include China. Article 6 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty about nuclear disarmament should be implemented finally, and countries should join the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Within the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, an additional protocol should be concluded prohibiting autonomous weapon systems. If that's not possible in that context, because they need a consensus, and there is no consensus visible there, an extra treaty might be needed. And one should generally discuss and agree on limits for the most dangerous military uses. It's not easy to define such limits at the moment. This needs additional research, and on the political side, it needs support by an active, critical public and interested and well-informed decision makers. I hope I have contributed to this by this talk, and I thank you for your attention.
We thank you, Jürgen, for this complete statement and for the very impressive presentation of the problematics. And I now give the floor to the room. Yes.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. My name is Fiona Moison. I'm with UNODA, but asking my question completely personal. I was wondering what you see as the best ways to bring some more convergence in views between states. Because, for example, in the CCW, GGE, there's been a lot of conversations for many years, but I wonder if you see any ways to progress that convergence even more. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the question, and probably the most important one in all the areas that I mentioned. I, for one, am a physicist, so a deeper answer should be expected from a political scientist, such as Michael Klare, for instance. However, in general terms, I can say that there are quite a few, handful or maybe a dozen countries which in the CCW, in the group of governmental experts, are firmly opposed even to a mandate for discussions or for negotiating about the limits or prohibition of certain types of autonomous weapon systems. And to my impression, I think what is needed is more public pressure by concerned publics in these countries and by decision makers. We had some experience with that with the laser blinding weapons protocol of 1995 under the same CCW, where the US within half a year or so had turned 180 degrees around from defending laser blinding weapons as possible military weapons, and then understanding with some influence from the international, or with much influence from the International Committee of the Red Cross, turned around and then this additional protocol prohibiting at least the use of blinding laser weapons was agreed in this convention. So I think the US, also with hinting at the highest amount on military research and development that the US does, has a pivotal role here. And I would like real much more activity in a concerned public and with some decision makers who take over the impetus in such role. I think there is some idea, as was discussed by the DOS representatives here, some idea about stability talks, but I think this should be much more general and should encompass all kinds of military technologies that are seen by the military as tools of achieving or keeping military technological superiority.
Hello. Other question?
Hi, I'm sorry. Hello. I wanted to really thank you so much for such a comprehensive presentation. In your slide about the dangers of autonomous weapon systems, you mentioned about the asymmetric scenarios versus how simulations are being done and the AWS and AI for war is equally capable and systems and how that can tend towards escalation. Could you expand on that a little bit and like how that works?
Well, there's one specific scenario about a colleague from Germany, Frank Sauer, and I myself have written an article in the journal Survival. That's a scenario of, in a crisis, a fleet of autonomous systems of side A, maybe close to the border, or maybe in international territory above the ocean or whatever, is close to an autonomous weapon systems fleet of side B, and they are not yet politically decided to start shooting. But if then some, they are eagerly observing each other, they will eagerly observe each other for any indications of that shooting is begun by the respective opponent. And if then some wrong signal arrives, be it a computer error or a sun reflex on some wing or any other funny sudden event that is being seen, then so that the systems think they are under attack. And if the flight time is just over short distances, just a few seconds, in order not to be destroyed by a mass volley of missiles from the other side, you have to shoot your missiles within these 5 or 7 or 10 seconds until the others arrive and your fleet is more or less lost. And so there will be a military necessity to program fast reaction into such systems in case they reliably see that they are being attacked. So of course, and I hope the systems will be not completely on hair trigger alert, and that some work is being done, how false alarms are being recognized and seen as such. But there's very little research on this. I know of quite a few modeling, combat modeling program systems that rather think about how they can win over the enemy in such a situation by being faster. And Michael again has already mentioned the notion of fighting at machine speed. So if the program is such that you have to shoot fast before you are being shot at, then such wrong signals could lead into the war that then could escalate relatively fast if you have lost a big part of your autonomous weapon systems fleet. So that's just one potential scenario. And I call for more research, and I'm thinking about doing another publication about possible mechanisms, how such kind of autonomous escalation into war, which a colleague, Paul Schar from the US, has called flash war, in analogy to flash crises between automatic trading systems at trade exchanges, so that such flash war automatism is being avoided, or at least contained as far as possible.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, Deborah Fisher from the United States Department of State. Again, first of all, I just wanted to thank you for hosting this very important event, and also thank both speakers for their thought-provoking presentations regarding the suggestion that the United States government and Department of State do more. I'll certainly take your messages back to my leadership. I think that they would agree with you that they would like to be doing more, and certainly appreciate your ideas and suggestions. So thank you very much. That's it.
Well, thank you. Wish you success at home.
Hi, sorry, thank you for sorry for taking the floor again. I just wanted to ask also a question about regulation, because you mentioned also on autonomous weapon systems, you know, maybe the need for a treaty, but also wider military applications of AI. Because I mean, if you compare now with nuclear, there's within the IAEA safeguarding the peaceful uses while also protecting against military uses. But with AI, it's much more difficult for verification, for example. How do you see those concerns on verification within any regulation on autonomous weapon systems or military uses of AI in a broader sense? Thank you.
Well, yes, thank you for that question. Again, this is an issue where, at least for the area of limitations on autonomous weapon systems, I have co-authored an article together with Marco Brut from the US. It's not easy to using traditional verification methods to verify compliance with an autonomous weapon prohibition, a potential one that I'd like to have, or I'd like to see. It could be physically the very same drones or surface autonomous motorboats, etc., that can shoot, either controlled by the computer on board or by remote control by some human in the loop who looks at the situation on a video screen and so on and so on. There is no real external characteristics that would discern an autonomous mode from a remotely controlled mode. So different from earlier nuclear weapons, where there were so-called, or where there still are, so-called functionally related observable differences between conventional missiles, say, or conventional bombers and nuclear ones. There's no such thing to be expected. And so verification that a system could not shoot autonomously would need inspection of the control program, of the control software. And that's obviously very difficult for armed forces to agree that somebody else, even in particular a potential enemy in war, would inspect your own control software. And even if that were granted, you could prepare the alternative software, the autonomous shooting software, before and after the inspector has left, just download it within a few minutes. So there is no real possibility to verify the non-ability of an uninhabited system to shoot autonomously. The only idea that my colleague and I came up with is there could be an obligation to record everything that had to do with any specific attack. So the video data that had been sent back to the control station, maybe a video film of the operator and its actions, his or her actions on the keyboard or on the mouse, and all the communication data that has flown to and fro between the control station on the one hand and the attack system on the other. Then the question, and then, of course, these informations need to be protected and need to remain in the custody of the respective warring party. So how could one make sure or could provide after the fact that each single attack had been under the control, under meaningful human control by a responsible human operator? Such recordings would have to be supplemented with control codes, so-called hash codes, that would be sent relatively fast to an international verification organization. And then after half a year or whatever, when the real data are no longer relevant, they could be asked for by the international organization, and this organization could then check whether the data are exactly the ones, bit for bit, the ones that had gone into creating of this control code. So even if you know the control code by some hacking or some spy in the international organization, you could not reconstruct the 1,000-fold information that has led to this control code. But when the original data are being provided later, when they are no longer relevant for the specific combat situation, they could reliably check whether these were actually the data that had been gone in to and fro and had been used in that special attack. So that's a special verification method that could be used given political will of the countries to actually provide guarantees that each and every attack is being controlled by a responsible human. It doesn't need much new technology because all the data are being recorded all the time by all drone operating organizations and armed forces for training the next generation and for evaluation and what have you. So the only thing that would have to be added is a small box producing the hash codes and the communication link to that international monitoring organization. The similar things might be used for artificial intelligence in other military uses, but that's a much more complicated problem and it demands more research.
Thank you.
Further question?
Thank you for this extremely informative and frightening presentation. My name's Jackie Cabasso. I'm with Western States Legal Foundation in California. You invited us, actually, I think, to ask more about the entanglement between conventional and nuclear weapons as it relates to AI. So I wonder if you could elaborate on what you had in mind.
Yes, yeah. I'm ready to answer. I'm not sure whether I actually invited you, but implicitly I probably did. Yes, there are several aspects to this. One is conventional weapons, some conventional weapons, in particular small uninhabited ones, are becoming so precise that they could be used in precision attacks against nuclear installations, be them nuclear weapon carriers, maybe mobile ICBMs. If you know their position, they are fairly easy to be destroyed. But it could also be command and control and communication systems with antennas, etc. So destroying a nuclear weapon and maybe destroying part of a suspected or of the second strike capability that countries find important to retain. So protection of this would be in danger because now it wouldn't need a nuclear attack to take out nuclear weapons of the enemy. So that's one aspect of it. Others are, there are ideas about if there is a big conventional attack going on. However, one side is being kind of driven back then for demonstration of its resolve and not accepting the defeat, to use a small nuclear weapon, still Hiroshima or Nagasaki size, several 10 or 15 or 20 or kilotons, but even if it's 5 kilotons TNT equivalent, it's still a destructive system with mass destruction. So there's the general idea of escalating to some nuclear use in order to prevent defeat on a non-nuclear battlefield. So these are two aspects of that, and there are several more having to do with attacks on satellites that provide either early warning of nuclear attack or military communication. And so there is, if you write me an email, you can find me over the internet. I'll send you a handful of articles that go into more detail here.
Another question, your neighbor.
Again, thank you so much for your commentary and analysis. Really appreciate it. I was wondering if you could expand if there's kind of what role the black box problem plays within kind of verification, and whether or not that's kind of a challenge we currently have, or is that something that's going to be kind of, and we'll finally find a workaround in the future?
I'm not sure what you mean by black box problems. My black box is no problem. As I said, there's a glass box with a small additional box where the hash codes are being produced and transmitted relatively soon to the International Monitoring Agency. And so the black box remains black until some time when this information is no longer needed for military protection.
Sorry, I was not meaning with your system specifically. I was meaning with machine learning algorithms that we currently don't really understand what's happening within the system specifically, oftentimes in many cases, at least in current analyses. So is that a problem that's going to be like an issue for analysis of those systems specifically? Does that pose an issue for verification?
Yes, very much so. And one needs much more research here. So learning algorithms, machine learning algorithms are relatively generally distributed. Much of them are public. You can download them, etc., etc. Question is about the data that are being used and to train them. And I have difficulties seeing military forces agreeing to provide the data they are using for training their potential future AI-controlled decision-making systems. So yes, there's a big problem here, and it needs more research. The thing that would be relatively easy to implement that I just mentioned for autonomous weapons systems prohibition, even they create some political problems, but I think the black box problems in general, AI applications in the military is much bigger, maybe 100-fold bigger, and needs more research and much more goodwill probably to implement than the other thing that I sketched.
Thank you.
Is there another question in the room? Yeah, if no question, perhaps we will end our session. I think with the help of our two speakers, we have underlined the need to address the new fields, these new fields. It's a need for the states, for the great powers, and I thank the official delegations to participate to this meeting. It's also a need for our NGOs to address these new issues, and that's what we want to do with such meetings, and I hope we have contributed to this work. Thank you for our two speakers. Michael is away, but thank you, Jürgen. Vielen Dank.
Yeah, welcome.
Für Ihre Hilfe und für Ihre sehr reiche Präsentation da. Und yes, I want to say it has been recorded. You can find the information. You can find all information on the IPB website, and I hope it will be needed, a good need for you. And I thank you for your participation. Thank you all. So